here is Ron Dayney, gardening.
Yes.
Gardening Ron Dayney.
One of the most curious things about modern American life is how one word can mean several different things, such as the word fast means something completely different to my wife and I, especially on our jet ski. The word far appears to mean something completely different to a city dweller who takes Uber everywhere versus somebody who lives in rural America and drives 30 miles just to get to the closest grocery store. One of those mysterious words that I've always wondered about is the word gardening. What is gardening? Is it a sport? Is it a hobby? Is it a religion? People make quite a big deal out of it. So I pondered this question my whole life. Finally, I got the chance to find out when my wife and I moved from our downtown condo in Chicago to a small suburban home where we finally had a little patch of dirt that I could experiment around with the meaning of gardening. This great journey began at a trailhead called Home Depot. There I met a wise old trail guide who instructed me on the critical gear I would need to obtain for the journey to gardening. He had me buy shovel, rake, hose, fertilizer, manure, weed killer, and the all-important seeds. I brought this potent mixture back home and I began tilling it into the soil. I was quite surprised to find out that using this equipment wound up being a very rigorous endeavor. So I continued working on it. I had chosen a spot behind our garage in full sunlight, and the ground was hardened and full of weeds. I wanted full sunlight because when you drive around the Midwest, anywhere around the Midwest, you'll see cornfields in full sunlight where the corn grows 6 feet tall. My corn was going to be 6 feet tall too. I learned a lot about shovels and the sharpness factors of hose. And it was a very rigorous endeavor. It was a labor of love doing it. So I carefully planted 3 rows of corn, tomatoes, and carrots. And then I watered and I waited. And I watered and waited some more. At this point into my excursion into gardening, I realized that gardening was much more than a rigorous sport or a hobby. It was a way of life. So I continued watering and waiting. In fact, I waited all summer long and nothing grew, not even the weeds. I was devastated. What had gone wrong? What had gone wrong? Was it improper use of hoe and shovel? Were the seeds defective? Was my potent mixture of fertilizer, manure, and weed killer not strong enough? I was very perplexed. Luckily, that autumn, my wife and I brought a new baby girl into the world and our home. I quickly forgot about the sport of gardening. I had a new sport called diapers, bottles, rocking, burping, a new way of life called parenting. Life moved on, and we ended up moving out to Henderson, Nevada. But I never forgot the lessons from gardening back in the Midwest, the main lesson being to interact with the earth. We went on many walks right behind our house in the desert in Henderson, and really all over Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. We went on hundreds of hikes back in those days, and every time we would collect dozens and dozens of beautiful rocks, gems, and minerals right off the ground. We bring them back home and we put them in a special corner of our backyard. With our Midwestern values of gardening and interacting with the earth, we collected dozens and dozens of rocks each hike, and we went on hundreds and hundreds of hikes. And our little collection of rock grew. Oftentimes It was a rigorous endeavor, hauling back the 20 or 30 pounds of extra rocks in our packs the 5 or 10 miles that we had hiked out. It was a labor of love, just like gardening had been. After 4 years and hundreds of hikes, we had thousands of rocks in this little corner. We had this vast, large collection of beautiful rocks. At that point, I looked at our rock collection and I realized I had my garden after all. It was a rock garden. It had all the basic elements of gardening. It was in the dirt. It took a lot of work to do, and we interacted with the earth to create it. All I needed to do was shift my attitude about gardening. A garden need not always produce corn, tomatoes, and carrots. A garden could be anything in the dirt, and it could produce joy instead of vegetables. After all, isn't joy just as important as vegetables?
Yes.
My family got a great harvest of joy out of our rock garden every year. It's the best kind of garden to have. 0 water is required. After a lifetime of searching for the meaning of gardening, I realize now that gardening is much more than a sport or a hobby or a way of life that I had thought 25 years ago. Gardening is a philosophy. Like 95% of life, gardening boils down to our attitude. So when I look at my thousands of rocks and minerals and see a beautiful garden, that is what it is.